How many of you are juniors in high school? Okay, and out of all of you that are juniors in high school, how many of you are taking English? I mean, hopefully all of you, because at least where I come from, that's the standard. But out of all of you that are taking English, or, how many of you in general, I guess, have read this wonderful book called The Grapes of Wrath? Now, I'm gonna be honest with you. If you haven't read this book, I don't know whether to say you're lucky or not, because this book is one of a kind. I want to be 100% honest with you right now. When I first read this book, and when I started reading throughout the whole thing, I was like, this book is so boring and hard to read now. But this book is legitimately probably the toughest book I've read, and I've read some Harry Potter books. This book is... wow. To be fair, this book isn't like Harry Potter or any of those other fantasy type books, okay? This is like a very serious book. It's like how do I say it? I guess it's like To Kill a Mockingbird in a way, but it's very different still, in that a lot of things don't happen throughout this book. Now, throughout this book, there are some chapters in between. They're called intercalary chapters, and a lot of stuff doesn't really happen that has to do with the main story, but they're still very important. So the one thing you need in order to read, understand, and enjoy this book is to pay attention to the smaller details and just get through the chapters. You cannot doze off. You have to have the patience, and you have to be able to read this. Because if you do not have the patience to read this, you're gonna doze off every 10 seconds and just be like, ugh, please just kill me now. Okay, no, you're not gonna wish you're dead. You'd be so bored. Okay, like I said, I thought it was kind of boring to read, but the payoff in the end, I'd say overall, I thought this book was good. I'm not trying to discredit this book at all. This is actually, I think, a very important book to read if you're a junior in high school or something like that. I think if you are a reader, I believe you should, have to read this book. I don't even know if you can see that freaking title because the light is it's such a glare. Yeah, you saw it? Alright, there it is. Going back to the intercalary chapters, they get praise, but they also get a lot of hate. Not a lot of hey, this book sucks because the freaking intercalary chapters. So I'm just saying, some people appreciate them and some do not appreciate them, but I will say they are actually important to the book, unlike some pieces of media.
Naruto, fairy tale.
Totally not Naruto in any way, or fairy tale. Anyways, you just have to keep in mind that the intercalary chapters, no matter how distant they may seem from the main story, is overall an important aspect of this book, and I would rather they be in this book than be out of it. So yeah, that's just my little take on it. Enough of me rambling on about what the book is. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to give you a deeper scoop of what is in this book, and my capture card just fell. Anyways, time to give you an analysis on The Grapes of Wrath.
Before I even go into analysis mode, you still have to know what the story is, so I'll try to explain the story as briefly as possible. Now, when I say the word depression, the first thing that may come to your mind would probably be the mental health disorder, but that's not what this book is about. Although, I guess it is kind of depressing, but, whatever. It's about the Great Depression, a time in which the American economy completely collapsed, affecting nearly every American financially. And then there was also the Dust Bowl, the time of severe dust storms that damaged the agriculture and the ecology of prairies. Both of these are important factors to the story, as the story is about the Joad family and their tough journey to California after the Dust Bowl affects them severely. We have Tom Joad, who just recently got out of prison for murder, his friend Jim Casey, a former preacher who gave up on his faith on a belief that all man is holy, whom Tom meets up with after he gets out, and you of course got Ma and Pa Joad, both a major courts of the family. You've also got Grandma and Grandpa Joad, along with Tom's siblings, Noah, who leaves the family halfway through the story because he feels that he is not loved as much as his siblings, Al, Ruthie, Winfield, and also Rose of Sharon, who is pregnant and has a husband, Connie. And last, but definitely not least, is Uncle John. Also, there's the dog that died a pretty gruesome death, so yeah. There are also other considerable characters whom the Joads come across, but for time's sake, they will not be mentioned unless a specific theme comes around. So the Joads are kicked out of their farm, leaving them with only one option: go to California because they hear tale of many jobs waiting for them, and with that will come the life they need to live. So the Joads and Casey all hop into the Joad-mobile, but Grandpa Joad really doesn't want to leave his home, so he's drugged, and eventually they were on their way. When I say drugged, I don't mean he was like dragged. Like I meant they slipped a little something in his coffee or whatever it was. Yeah, that happened. They drugged Grandpa. Good job. Unfortunately, Grandpa does die the evening of their departure on the road, so bye-bye, Grandpa. It was nice knowing you for that brief amount of time. And so the Joads encounter the main part of their journey, which is Route 66, and they soon figure out the road, or route, to a better life is not pleasant in any way, shape, or form. There's cheap pay from cheap bosses with the likes of a very, very greedy mechanic, some very hateful people who refer to the migrants as Okies, corrupt cops, and there was also rumors floating around that California isn't all that it's said to be, which doesn't exactly sound pleasant to the Joads as it's their only chance to a better life. Another tragedy later strikes the Joad family when Ma informs the family that Grandma is dead and had been dead for a few days. It's kind of uncomfortable to find out that a dead body was just sitting around in your car, rotting away, yeah? Oh, and remember the rumor that California wasn't all that it was said to be? Well, they continue on and become more apparent as one man describes California as a state only hyped up to be a state for good work and pay to lure in a bunch of workers for cheap labor. You also can't do a damn thing about it, otherwise you face the cops. And I'm gonna just let you know now that did not work for this one unfortunate poor soul. Eventually, Jim Casey sacrifices himself for Tom after an altercation with the cops because they didn't know what would become of Tom considering his criminal record. More unluckiness comes around as an angry mob comes to the camp the Joads are staying at, and meanwhile Rose of Sharon's husband just abandons the Joads. Soon after, Tom meets up with Casey again, who was now on a mission to help the common man with the unfair labor unions. Sadly for Casey though, he is killed during a scuffle, and Tom avenges his death by axing his killer to death. This also puts Tom on the radar, so from here on out he has to do his damnedest to stay hidden, because if he's caught, well, he's so screwed. Anyways, Tom eventually comes to a decision to help continue on with his fallen friend's legacy, and to do so, he must leave his family behind, and that's when he gives his famous "I'll be there" speech. After Tom leaves, the family keeps on going and going until Rose of Sharon starts going into labor. She obviously gets depressed about this, but finds ease in, well, you see, she kinda...
How do I explain this? She finds peace in, well, she finds peace in breastfeeding a dying, starving man that she does not know in any way, shape, or form.
Okay, anyways, that's the end of the book, the end. Okay, go into analysis mode now. Alright, so it's no secret that John Steinbeck snuck in some biblical allusions in this book. I mean, Jim Casey is basically Jesus Christ. He's the center of morality in the book, and I might be going for a stretch on this one, but he pretty much sacrifices himself only to come back later to preach a great cause. I mean, he didn't die in the first place, but, you know, he does die, so... he's still a martyr. Just like Jesus. Also, his initials are akin to Jesus Christ, JC, so yeah. Okay, and besides Jim Casey himself, there are a ton of details in this story that relate to the Bible a whole lot. For example, the Joads packing into the truck is similar to the animals loading into Noah's Ark, and then there's also the reference to the move to California, which is a reference to the exodus of Jews to Israel from Egypt. Alright, so we know that there's a lot of biblical references, but why? Why does Steinbeck tie in so much religion to his novel? I mean, he wasn't even all that religious, so what was his reason for doing so? Well, it's most likely due to the storytelling factor, as comparing a story to the Bible in such a way that he did is an incredible feat, as it shows the struggle that the Joads went through and the cruelty that goes on in the world around them, and it helps us understand it as much as possible. Now, an obvious theme around this story is the theme of family, arguably the most important one. The Joads are obviously the one family that we pay the most attention to. The story is centered around them, and in the beginning of the story, when Tom meets up with his family, it's sort of satisfying to see a family reunion, and meeting the Joads is pretty nice. It's also cool to see them working together. Throughout the book, we also get to see and observe how the family managed to fall apart as Grandma and Grandpa Joad died. Noah stays behind the family, and Connie just flat out abandons them. Then, when Tom finally comes to a decision to lead the family for a greater cause, it becomes more apparent to Ma that the family really has fallen apart. Alright, there's that whole thing about the Joad family alone, but when we talk about family, we're not just talking about the Joad family, because that would be doing this book a disservice. No, we mean all the migrants that come together and become one big, huge family. Together, they become one because of all that they have in common. They all have been kicked out one way or another, and they are all searching for a greater life. During their times at the camp, they begin to bond in a spectacular fashion as it seems they have the time of their lives. They are not enemies. They are not hateful or bitter towards each other. They are not sour of each other either. They're just one big family, and they all suffer the same way. Okay, one final thing that is very much worthy of noting is the theme of dignity. What do I mean when I say that? Well, throughout the story, the Joads struggle a whole lot. We know that as a fact, because Grandpa and Grandma died, Noah left, and even some discrimination has come their way. But despite all that has happened, including Tom leaving, they still somehow maintain pride and dignity and the will to move on. By the end of the book, you would think that the Joads would actually give up, especially after Tom was left and the baby was stillborn. But no, that's not what happens. They still have the will to go on and be good folk. Recall the taboo breastfeeding between Rose of Sharon and the dying, starving man. Rose of Sharon didn't have to do anything at all for him. After all, she is heartbroken after all that she has been through, so why should she do anything? It's true that she could have just ignored him and leave him to die, but she helped him by nurturing him. She did a good deed because deep inside, she still has that bit of humanity left. The little bit that all good folk have. Despite her actions in the beginning of the story, she's no longer a careless woman, she is the heart and soul of a good person. And despite the tragedies, inconveniences, and all that's come to the Joad's way, they are all still good folk, and that's what really matters for this family.
When I first started to read this book, I 100% thought it was going to be a bore fest that I was just being forced to read. That wasn't the case at all. This book, as I said earlier, is one of a kind. If you have the patience to get through all of the intercalary chapters and the seemingly meaningless details, you will enjoy this book. I can guarantee that. It's a very important novel. It's not the most exciting novel to read like Harry Potter or even The Outsiders. God, I missed that book. My point is, this is a different book than anything I've ever read. It's got some complex dialect. It's got very religious ties. I mean, Steinbeck wasn't very religious himself, but he definitely makes a point to tie in religion in it, as so we, the readers, could definitely understand the struggles that the Joads themselves are going through throughout this whole story. I do highly recommend that you read this book if you have not. If you are just looking for a book to read that does have like complex dialect and a great story, that involves a family who's struggling, this is the book. This is the book. It's got incredible morals in it. All in all, I'm just saying, this is a great book. It is at first a little bit boring depending on what kind of books you like to read, but this book deserves the place it's gotten in the realm of literature, and hopefully it stays that way for the remainder of time.
Wherever there's a fight so hungry people can eat, I'll be there. Wherever there's a cop beating up a guy, I'll be there. I'll be in the way guys yell when they're mad. I'll be in the way kids laugh when they're hungry and they know supper's ready. And when the people are eating the stuff they raise and living in the houses they build, I'll be there too.